On my engagement day, not a single member of my family showed up. Not even my mother, who had promised to stand by my side and give me her blessing, appeared. They all flocked to my brother's promotion party, an event they treated as a collective victory for the entire clan. A day later, I posted a single simple photo on social media. Less than an hour after that, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating with dozens of missed calls and a flurry of messages. What could have made those who once looked down on me suddenly reverse course? Stay until the end because you won't expect the way the truth reveals itself. All my life I was cast as the lesser sibling, the faint shadow of my brother Charles, the family's endless pride. Our household functioned no differently than a dynastic corporation. My mother, Miranda, always played the anxious CEO, while Charles was the core asset on whom everyone staked their bets. He had a prestigious MBA, a wife from the renowned Whitmore family, and lived in a luxurious suburban home whose hedges were sculpted into geometric works of art. In their eyes, Charles's life was the main stage, and I was merely background cast. They could never understand my choice. I chose Matteo, a sculptor whose hands were always stained with clay and plaster. In a small studio behind our damp rental house, he shaped forms out of silence and light. To me, that was the fragrance of creation. To the family, it was nothing more than the stench of financial failure. When I announced my engagement instead of joy, my mother sighed with pity. She said, "My dear, art is beautiful, but no one hangs it on the walls of a house you can't afford." My brother gave a dry chuckle, still toying with his wineglass. "Let's hope you don't collapse without a foundation. Not everyone can make a living from clay statues." My family always operated like a peculiar balance sheet where every feeling was priced and every decision referenced a social return on investment. In that ledger, my brother Charles was the long-term investment that received unconditional capital infusions. And me, I was merely a high-risk startup they never believed in. Charles had everything the family desired: an executive title at a real estate conglomerate, a tastefully dressed wife, and a gleaming suburban house with a sapphire blue pool. At every gathering, the only story on repeat was his latest success, a $1 million deal, a project cited in the press, or a European trip to unwind after signing a contract. To my mother, every one of Charles's achievements proved she had managed the family like a masterful CEO. And me, I took a different turn. I chose Matteo, the man whose hands carve figures from inanimate clay. He didn't have the Whitmore or Harrington surname to open golf club doors. He had only a cramped studio that smelled of plaster, half-finished statues, and such patient eyes that they made me believe in something larger than money. Yet when my mother and Charles looked at Matteo, all they saw were worn shoes and dust-stained clothes, then slapped on him the label of a man without a real career. To them, value was measured in real estate stocks and fundraising galas. They couldn't comprehend a world built from ideas, passion, and diligent hands. I still remember my mother's eyes the day I announced my engagement. They didn't shine with joy. They were tinged with regret, as if she had just watched a stock price crash. "Daughter, you've chosen a path that makes the whole family worry." Her words were gentle but landed like a sentence. Charles, with a half-smile, added only, "This world isn't kind to those without a solid foundation." The decisive blow felt like a scene pre-directed long in advance. 1 month before my engagement ceremony, Charles hosted a party to celebrate his new position, a lavish gala at a grand hotel, white lilies covering the long tables and a string ensemble playing in the background. When guests received their invitations, I realized the date and time of his event matched exactly the slot I had reserved for my modest engagement celebration. "It's just a coincidence," Charles said, resting his hand on my shoulder with feigned sympathy, though triumph flashed in his eyes. My mother added, "Dear everyone will surely try to split their time, but you know a promotion party is important for the whole family." Her words sounded like an apology, but underneath lay an implicit directive. My wedding was merely a side event. On the big day, reality laid itself bare. The engagement room was simply decorated with wildflowers and candlelight, yet the rows reserved for family sat empty. I waited in the restaurant's small anteroom, watching the minutes tick by, clinging to a fragile thread of hope. Messages popped up one after another. "Sorry. Dear Charles needs me today." "Hard to slip out. Everyone's congratulating your brother." And finally from my mother herself, "This moment belongs to your brother. Please understand." Each word appeared like a tiny dagger slicing into the last delicate remnant of my trust. I understood they weren't merely missing a ceremony. They were publicly confirming that my place in the family had long been relegated to the not worth investing category. As the opening music swelled beyond the door, I looked at myself in the mirror, a bride about to be announced with no blood relative to take her hand. It wasn't just absence. It was a stark proclamation that I was only a dim shadow in the play my family had staged for Charles. And in that moment, the humiliation reached its limit. Exactly 15 minutes before the start time, the anteroom door creaked open. Not my mother, not a late-arriving relative. Standing there was Mr. Alvarez, the owner of the old house, where Mateo and I rented the back carriage unit. A man in his 70s, a former diplomat composed in demeanor, wearing a perfectly tailored pinstripe suit and gentle, intelligent eyes. He held a small, craft paper-wrapped box, intending only to drop by with congratulations. His gaze landed by chance on the phone lying on the table, its screen lit with a string of messages from my mother and Charles, each a refusal wrapped in politeness and cruelty. He looked at me, then at the white dress in the mirror, his face unnervingly calm in a room stuffed with betrayal. After a few seconds of stillness, he spoke softly, his voice warm yet allowing no argument. "Young lady, if the father who promised to walk by your side chose to be absent, then let me take his place. It would be my greatest honor to escort you on this day." My eyes brimmed but did not spill over. A strange peace spread through me. I nodded, and so not by my mother's or brother's hand, but by the steady arm of a stranger I walked into the ceremony. The wedding was simple, yet every toast and every laugh from dear friends carried warmth. Mateo looked at me with a love that needed no validation. In that moment, I realized some blood ties only leave wounds, while unexpected bonds can become true support. After the ceremony, as guests were still clinking glasses, Mr. Alvarez approached a mischievous glint, as if he were guarding a secret. He whispered to Mateo, "I hear you two haven't planned a trip. That must change now." He took out his phone and dialed a familiar number with the ease of one accustomed to managing the significant. Minutes later, he smiled. A close friend of his, an international art collector, had decided to gift us a honeymoon on his private yacht. In that instant, I knew the chessboard had begun to turn. The next morning, before the sun fully touched the marina, Mateo and I stood on the deck of a pristine white yacht. The vessel was so elegant I felt I might be touching a dream, its hull gleaming as if carved from moonlight, cabins lined with plush carpets, the saline breath of the sea mingling with the bubbles in our champagne flutes. Mateo held my hand tightly, his eyes shining not at the luxury, but at the thought that a work he'd poured his passion into had been repaid with an unimaginable gift. I took out my phone, aimed the camera at the deep blue, where the horizon dissolved into waves, and snapped a photo, two hands entwined the endless ocean behind us. I posted it with a short caption, "The journey begins." Not an act of revenge, nor a boast. It was a declaration of independence, of no longer being the loss-making project in the family ledger, but the protagonist of my own life. In less than 15 minutes, my screen lit up non-stop. 47, then 102, then 200 missed calls, message after message. "Where are you? Who paid for this trip? I'm so worried, please call back." Those who had turned their backs in unison now scrambled to find a place in my story. Mateo chuckled and switched my phone to silent. "Let the sea wind sing for them," he said. We raised our glasses, the sound of the waves against the hull drowning out every worry. I knew that from the moment that photo began to circulate, my family had realized they'd bet on the wrong hand. And now I was the one holding the trump card. 3 days after leaving port, I decided to answer one of the calls. On the other end, my mother's voice trembled as if breaking Elena. "Are you all right? We've been worried sick." I stayed silent for a few seconds, letting the vastness of the ocean spill into the cracks of her lie. She wasn't worried. She was furious. For the first time in her life, I possessed a story she couldn't control. Behind her, I clearly heard Charles's voice cut in cold and sharp. "Ask her who paid for the yacht. Who's behind this?" My mother instantly shifted from concern to interrogation. "Elena, stop hiding it. Is Mateo from a wealthy family you've kept secret? If so, you should have told us earlier." I drew a long breath, eyes following a pod of dolphins vaulting over the waves as if punctuating my answer. "No, mother. Mateo has no hidden fortune. He has something your world never accounts for on its balance sheet, talent, and honor, and that is what opened these doors today." On the other end, the silence dropped heavy as lead. I continued lightly, "This yacht belongs to Mr. Donovan Parrish, an esteemed art collector. He was moved by the work Mateo created, so he gifted this trip as a wedding present. And it was all arranged by Mr. Alvarez, the man you once dismissed as the rent collector." My mother choked out a vague sound like a balloon deflating. From afar, Charles shouted, "This is a setup. She staged this to humiliate us." I smiled, setting my glass down on the deck table. "No, brother. I'm simply letting the truth speak for itself. How ashamed you feel, that isn't my responsibility." Before my mother could fabricate more excuses, I said softly, "Send my regards to the family. I have to hang up. We're about to see migrating whales." I ended the call. The final thread between us snapped clean and neat. When I put the phone down, the sea breeze threaded through my hair, carrying a sense of release I had never tasted. For years, I was the red number on the family ledger, the loss mentioned with regret, pushed aside whenever Charles posted another profit. Yet in the very moment they unanimously cast me out, they handed me a gift: freedom. Mateo sat beside me, sketching the outline of a whale that had just dived. He looked up, smiled, and I suddenly understood in our small world the dusty studio, clay-stained hands afternoons spent waiting for light to pass through the window. We had built a foundation stronger than any suburban mansion. The missed calls kept pouring in, finally reaching 417. To me, each notification was not a sign of sincere remorse, but living proof of their poor choices. They had wagered everything on a single asset, only to lose the most precious capital of all family. I was no longer angry. In its place was a calm smile. I knew that if one day they truly learned the value of respect, not for titles or possessions, but for dignity and effort, the door to my heart might gently open. But until then, my road would no longer be bound by their judgmental gaze. Standing on the deck, I whispered as if to myself and to anyone who has ever been dismissed. When people cast you aside, it isn't always the end. Sometimes it's when you're freed to begin a much wider journey. And in the sound of the surf, I realized by pushing me out of their circle, my family hadn't diminished me. On the contrary, they had given me an entire ocean to belong to. If you believe dignity and talent matter more than money and status, please leave a like on this video. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. And remember to share because someone out there might need to hear that family isn't always right, but respect is always worth fighting for.